The following episode contains graphic descriptions of burnings, children in peril, immolation, dismemberment, death, and possible murders from police case files. Listener discretion is advised. Howdy there, listener. Welcome to Reel, Audio Essays and Mysteries. You can call me Carter, and I'll be your host. Come with me as we wade through news stories, mysteries, declassified government files, true crimes, cults, and legends. Everyone and everything has a story, and there are so many out there. Some fact, some fiction, but all in need of being processed, analyzed, categorized, and above all, told. So, if you would, please pull up a chair, join me by the fire, and lend me your ear, because I have so much that I want to tell you. On July 2nd, 1951, the partially cremated remains of Mary Hardy Reeser were found in her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida. She was 67. And no source of the fire could be located, there was no accelerant, and there were no signs of forced entry to be found. Firemen on the scene even noted that there wasn't even a burning stench. Neither local nor federal authorities could establish exactly what had caused Mrs. Reeser to burn to death, leading the public to believe this was yet another case of spontaneous human combustion. Spontaneous human combustion, otherwise known as SHC, is a term encompassing reported cases of the combustion of a living or very recently deceased human body without an apparent external source of ignition. To put it simply, it's when a person just starts burning to death out of nowhere. No source of ignition, no accelerant, nothing. Just a random fire that consumes them, seemingly originating from within their own body. Usually regarded as pseudoscience and folklore, spontaneous human combustion has been well documented, or rather well alleged, for hundreds of years, even stretching all the way back to the early 1700s. Today, we're going to focus on specific examples from more recent history, starting with the declassified FBI files on the Mary Reeser case, otherwise known as the Cinder Lady. The following is a special report written by two St. Petersburg detectives who investigated the incident. Their names have been redacted, and therefore are unknown. Special report of Redacted and Redacted, dated July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 1951. Predication. Complaint from the number 1 fire station relative to an explosion and/or fire at above address, originally answered by Lieutenant Redacted, Patrolman Redacted and Redacted, and complaint filed by Lieutenant Redacted as follows. Mrs. Mary Hardy Reeser, 67, was burned to death at above address, apartment on ground floor. The Rhodes Funeral Home has body. Redacted was the coroner. They've not decided what could be the cause of the fire at this time. The electric clock was stopped at 4:20. Mrs. Reeser's chair at the southwest corner of the living room was all burned up at the springs. The body was east of the chair on the floor, head south, feet north, and the body was all burned, but the knees to the feet were all right. Black suede shoes were also not burned. Investigation of the premises showed that the apartment was the southeast apartment of the Alameda Apartments, owned and operated by Mrs. Pansy N. Carpenter. On entering screen door to a hallway, a left turn is made to get to the door of the apartment in question. This door was partly open on our arrival, and we were informed by Redacted that that was the way the door was when she was first discovered. The hall between the apartment of Mrs. Reeser and the other apartment in the wing was well smoked up from the distance of about 3 feet, from the floor to the ceiling. The ceiling was heavily smoked, and the faceplate to the switch in the hall was melted out of shape. This faceplate was approximately 8 feet from the door to the Reeser apartment. The entire apartment ceiling was blackened by smoke. Drapes in the dining area were blackened around the top but were not scorched. The south window screen in the dining area was clogged with soot. Folding doors between the dining area and the kitchen were blackened but not scorched. Faceplates on the light switches in the apartment were melted. However, faceplates on the wall outlets located about 2 1/3 foot from the floor were not damaged at all. Folding doors from the living area to the dressing room were scorched around top. The heater in the living room appeared in good shape and was turned off. The bathroom was heavily smoked, although there was no damage to the light fixtures. 2 plastic bathing caps hanging behind the bathroom door were not damaged. There was heavy burning in the partition between the living area and the kitchen, although papers on the table and top water heater, which was against the wall, were not scorched. The kitchen equipment, which is all GE Frigidaire and consisting of refrigerator, 3-burner stove, and tabletop water heater are in good shape and show no sign of electric short. None of the furniture left in the apartment shows any fire damage. The sheets on one day bed, which had been made up, are not scorched and have their original life. 2 candles that were on the buffet and dining area were melted. The plastic curtain in the dressing room was in no way damaged by fire. Furniture in the apartment is as follows: 2 day beds, one of which was made up for a bed, a corner table between the 2 beds, on which were a fan, electric clock, which had stopped at 4:20, and a table model radio. 1 straight back chair, 4 dining room chairs and a table, 1 buffet, on which an electric fan and 2 candlesticks, kitchen equipment set forth above. The dressing room was 1 chair and a chest of drawers, a mirror over the chest of drawers, and the mirror was broken. Not present in the house at the time of the examination, but which was reported as having been present at the time of the fire, were an overstuffed easy chair, end table, and lamp. The chair was destroyed by the fire, with the exception of the springs. The end table was destroyed with the exception of 2 small pieces of the legs. The legs are the bottom portions of the table and are hardly scorched. The lamp was of a wooden standard, which was burned off. The lampshade was destroyed, but the lamp bulb was still burned, and the hard rubber switch were not damaged. Interviewed redacted, relative to discovery of fire. Stated she awakened after hearing a dull thud, such as the shutting of a door, at about 5 a.m. Monday, July 2nd. She looked around outside, saw nothing of a suspicious nature, and started back to bed. As she headed into the house, she thought she smelled smoke, such as in the overheating of an electric motor, so she turned off her electric pump, then went back to the house and that to bed. Later, she got up and brought the paper into the house. At this time, she thought it odd that Mrs. Reeser was not up listening to her radio, as was her habit. At this time, she noticed nothing unusual and smelled no smoke. She did not pay attention to the apartment occupied by Mrs. Reeser. At about 8 a.m., a Western Union boy came and inquired as to which apartment Mrs. Reeser was in. Redacted took the telegram and went over to the apartment, as she also wanted to take over the newspaper. On arriving at the screen door, she felt it and felt that it was hot. She called to the boy and said that something was wrong and for him to come help her. The screen door was unlocked at this time. The boy kept on walking to the street, so she called to some painters who were working across the street. They came over and went to the apartment as she called the fire department and Dr. Reeser. Redacted did not enter the apartment or look in. When asked about the door being opened, she stated that usually the door to the apartment was open, but the screen door was locked. Interview of Redacted, first person to look into the apartment. He stated that on hearing Redacted call for help, he, in company of Redacted and Redacted, ran across the street to help her out. She told him that there was a woman in the apartment. Redacted looked in at the bed across from the door and, seeing no one lying on the bed, backed out and asked Redacted to call the fire department. He did not enter the apartment. He further stated the bed had the appearance of having been slept in. Interview of Redacted stated he entered the room after blank, looked in, and he passed through the entire house before seeing the remains of the deceased on his way back out. Stated when he entered the apartment there was very little flame but quite a lot of smoke. In the hottest part of the fire he saw the springs from the chair and part of the lamp. There were a few flames licking up through the springs of the chair. All he could see of the body was the lower part of one leg and a black satin shoe. He noticed that the bedclothes of one of the beds was turned down and appeared as if someone had slept in it. The ceiling light was on in the dressing room, and he tried to turn it off, but the faceplate of the switch had melted, and he was afraid to touch it. All that remained of the fire was a red smoldering mass. These men both stated that the heat was not what one might call intense. Interview of Assistant Fire Chief. On his arrival at the scene, there was a very small amount of smoke coming out of the screen door, which would hardly be noticed by an average person with no fire training. The inside was filled with smoke, and he entered to open windows to allow the smoke to dissipate. The heat was not too intense, and there was very little visible fire. The fire was put out by a hand pump. At the time he entered, he did not see any of the body, and it was not until he was on his way out that he saw the leg. Interview of Redacted relative to the actions of Mrs. Reeser. Mrs. Reeser rented the apartment the last day of May, and she was a very congenial person and was considered an excellent tenant. Mrs. Reeser's day seemed to revolve around her son, Dr. Richard Reeser. Mrs. Reeser's usual day was composed of getting up rather early in the morning, usually before 6 a.m., and listening to the radio, washing her underclothes, and etc. She would eat a hearty breakfast around 7 to 8 a.m. and wait until her son came over from his morning cup of coffee at about 10 a.m. She would then leave to go downtown to do her son's banking. She would come back home at about 4 a.m., lie down and rest until dinner time, which she had at the doctor's house. She would return home about 8 p.m., lie down with the lights out, listening to the radio until she was ready to retire. She was in the habit of taking some Seconal tablets before going to sleep. Sunday night, she came home about 4:30 p.m. and appeared slightly upset. Mrs. Richard Reeser came over about 5:30 p.m. and stayed a short while. Dr. Reeser then came over about 8 p.m. and left in a short time. Redacted talked to Miss Reeser for a short time, either just before the doctor came or shortly after he left. At this time, she was dressed in a rayon nightgown and black satin shoes. She stated that she was a little upset and had taken 2 Seconals and was going to take 2 more a little later. Redacted was led to believe that she was upset over a family quarrel. However, she was a little disappointed about taking a trip back to her home. Redacted went over about 8:50 p.m. and was going to bring some ice cream back from the drugstore for Mrs. Reeser. But as she passed by the apartment, she noticed the lights were out and the radio was turned off, so she decided not to wake her up. Interview of Dr. Richard Reeser, Jr. He stated the family had gone to the beach Sunday morning and returned home around 3:30 p.m. A short time after arriving home, he found his mother sitting in a chair crying. He asked what was wrong. She said she was feeling bad about not being able to take her trip north. The reason for this was that the woman who was to come down and take his mother north and find an apartment for her had an accident and wasn't able to leave, and that no apartment had been found. He stated his mother was independent and didn't want to go up there and be a burden on anyone. She asked the doctor to take her home, and he said he would as soon as he had a shower. After taking a shower, he found that his mother had started to walk home, so he asked his wife to see if she could find his mother and give her a ride the rest of the way. Dr. Reeser went over to the apartment about 8 p.m. to see his mother, see if there was anything he could do for her. At the time he arrived, she was sitting in her nightgown. She told him she had taken 2 Seconals and it would take 2 more before retiring. He left within a few minutes and did not see his mother again. He further stated that his mother had an operation on her back about 10 years ago, and it was difficult for her to move fast or get out of a deep chair. Mrs. Reeser smoked some and usually used a lighter. The lighter was found in her purse. He did not know much about her financial circumstances, as they were all handled through a bank in Columbia, Pennsylvania. He let her do most of his banking in order that she would have something to do in the daytime. Interview of Mrs. Richard Reeser, Jr. Stated that she had gone over to the mother-in-law's apartment Sunday evening about 5 p.m. and stayed just a short time. She was unable to shed any light on the reason Mrs. Mary Reeser came home early Sunday. She stated that the nightgown Mrs. Reeser wore was of Von Ralt rayon acetate with a stocking weave. Missing is a rayon housecoat, colored black. The chair that she was burned in was identified as one made by the Hendricks Bros, Inc., style number 137, cover 1527, green, made of an all-material consisting of cotton felt and inner spring unit. Examination of the electrical equipment. And city electricians examined the electrical system in the apartment and found the following facts. Only one fuse in the entire apartment was burned out, and that was the fuse to the hot water heater. There was no indication of a short in the outlet near the chair where the deceased had been sitting. The insulation was burned off the wires and through the conduit, but there was no sign of the wire having been fused or in any other way damaged. There was no damage of any kind to the fuse box or any sign of high voltage or amperage overload. None of the switches seemed damaged, although the face plates were melted. As you can see from that report, local investigators were perplexed. They weren't even able to find an ignition source of any kind, outside of a lighter, but that was back in Reeser's purse. After not being able to find a cause or a source of ignition, accelerant, or anything else, they contacted the FBI for assistance. The following is a letter from Chief J.R. Reichert of the St. Petersburg PD to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, detailing the event and requesting the assistance of the FBI Crime Lab. Dear Mr. Hoover, at 8:07 a.m. Monday, July 2nd, 1951, we received a report of a fire in an apartment of 1200 Cherry Street, Northeast. Mrs. Mary Hardy Reeser was burned to death. Cause of fire is not known. See diagram apartment attached. The body of Mrs. Reeser was partially cremated with the exception of the left foot, which was burned completely in two, about 4 inches above the ankle. The shoe had been worn on the left foot by the deceased, and it was still intact. The chair in which he had been sitting was completely burned away, leaving just the springs. The small end table was completely burned with the exception of 2 legs, and the carpet was burned in the area of approximately 3 feet. The apartment showed signs of extreme heat on the ceilings, walls, and approximately 4 feet from the floor, and the plastic light switches had melted, but floor plugs were unharmed. An electrical clock was also stopped at 4:20 a.m. Mrs. Reeser is described as a white female, age 67, height 5'7", and 170 pounds. When last seen, at approximately 8 p.m. Sunday night, July 1st, she was wearing a Van Ralt rayon acetate nightgown from a stocking weave. Her black rayon house coat could not be found. Under separate cover, via Railway Express, we are forwarding the following exhibits. Exhibit 1, glass fragments found in ashes. Exhibit 2, 6 small objects thought to be teeth. Exhibit 3, metal from near the body. Exhibit 4, fibers thought to be part of a nightgown. Exhibit 5, particles of bone found in ashes. Exhibit 6, charred fabric thought to be from chair. Exhibit 7, cotton material from chair. Exhibit 8, charred wood. Exhibit 9, charred legs from end table. Exhibit 10, charred fabric from rug. Exhibit 11, unburned section of rug, heavily soaked with greasy substance. Exhibit 12, rest of ashes. Exhibit 13, shoe from foot not consumed by fire. And Exhibit 14, chair springs. Examination requested. Would like examination of glass in Exhibit 1 to determine if any of the glass is part of a bottle or container that might have contained a substance that would have caused the fire to burn with such intense heat. Determine heat necessary to soften glass to cause it to assume shape. 2. Examine small objects in Exhibit 2 to see if they are human teeth. If so, what heat would be necessary to destroy them in their present condition. 3. Examine metal in Exhibit 3 to see if it is lead, such as might be in a hearing aid or from lead-acid container. 4. Examine fibers in Exhibit 4 to see if they are from nightgown, etc. Nightgown is supposed to have been a rayon acetate combination. 5. Examine particles of bone in Exhibit 5 to ascertain the presence of any foreign substances that may have been used to start fire and maintain heat. 6. Examine articles in Exhibits 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, also 11 and 14, for presences of any acid or other substances that might have been used to start a fire or used to maintain intense heat. 7. Examine section of rug, Exhibit 11, and shoe, Exhibit 13, to ascertain greasy substances which saturate the same. And 8. Any other test that might explain the almost complete destruction of a human body. We also request any information or theories that could explain how a human body could be so destroyed and the fire confined to such a small area and so little damage done to the structure of the building and to the furniture in the room not even scorched or damaged by smoke. Photographs included, labels from duplicate chair, and evidence enclosed in which remains of Mrs. Reeser found. This evidence has not been examined by any other examiner, nor will it be. Yours very truly, J.R. Reichert, Chief of Police. On July 31st, 1951, the FBI Crime Lab issued their results. Results of examination. An examination of the specimens, Q1 through Q14, showed the presence of no oxidizing chemicals, petroleum or hydrocarbons, or any other volatile fluids commonly used as accelerants, or any chemical substance used to initiate or accelerate combustion. The greasy substance, which saturated several of these specimens, was found to be human fat. The absence of any traces of volatile and flammable fluids does not preclude, of course, the possibility that such fluids were used in destroying the body of the deceased. Because of the very nature, gasoline, ether, and similar flammable fluids are consumed ordinarily in the early stages of the fire. Where there has been almost complete combustion, as in this case, it would be most unlikely to find such fluids even if they had been present at the beginning of the fire. As regards the destruction of the deceased body, which occurred in this case, it's entirely possible the body was consumed to the extent shown in the photographs and is indicated by the bone fragments and other debris without the aid of any such material as gasoline. It is not generally realized the extent of which the human body can burn once it becomes ignited. While such cases are not common, there are on record numerous instances of bodies burning with almost complete destruction. It was formerly believed that such cases arose from spontaneous combustion, where the burning was sometimes attributed to preternatural causes. There is, however, absolutely no evidence from any of these causes on record to show that the burning is of this nature, or any have occurred other than when the body is ignited by some external means. The unusual aspects of such cases of burning have been heightened by the fact that, in many instances, little damage from burning occurred in the room or area directly surrounding the victim. As in this case, the remains of the victim were found reclining in the wreckage of a chair, sofa, bed, or, in one instance, sitting on a stairway. In the last named case, the victim was a woman who had been clad in rather voluminous garments. Not a vestige of clothing was found remaining in that case, although no extensive damage was done to the stairs. As indicated above, these cases are explained by the fact that the body becomes ignited from some outside cause, such as burning clothing or a burning mattress, chair, or other means. Once the body starts to burn, there's enough fat and other flammable substances to permit varying amounts of destruction to take place. Sometimes this destruction by burning will proceed to a degree which results in almost complete combustion of the body. In this case, the absence of any scorching or damage to the furniture in the room can only be explained by the fact that the heat liberated by the burning body had a tendency to rise and formed a layer of hot air, which never came in contact with the furnishings on a lower level. This situation would have occurred particularly if the fire had smoldered rather than burned freely. The distorted pieces of glass in specimen 1 were found to soften in the vicinity of 1,000 to 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. This temperature corresponds to a bright red heat. All the objects in specimen 2 are the remains of human teeth, with the exception of one object which appeared to be an artificial tooth or part of a denture. The composition of specimen 3 does not indicate that this specimen is from lead storage battery. A portion of a cigarette lighter was found in specimen 3, and remaining metal in this specimen could also be from a lighter. The melted metal in specimen 3 corresponds in a composition white metal. In this connection to white metal could be used as the case of a hearing aid, but no portions of a battery were found in specimen 3. The two fragments of burned fabric composing specimen 4 were found to be of different composition. The larger fragment is made of cotton and was woven in a plain weave. The smaller piece is not of cotton, but is also woven in a plain weave. This piece was so badly charred the type of fabric could not be determined. There's attached a heterocopy of communication received from Redacted concerning this case. A copy of our reply to Redacted is also enclosed. The FBI file mostly stops there. The rest is filled with requests from students, reporters, and true crime authors requesting information on the case. Information which the Bureau didn't have, since they weren't the ones who headed the investigation. It was out of their jurisdiction. They just helped with analyzing the evidence. The rest was done by local police, but that didn't seem to matter much to people. Mrs. Reeser's strange and untimely demise became a bit of a national phenomenon at the time, and even got her dubbed the Cinder Lady. So what did happen to poor Mrs. Reeser? Well, the official cause of the fire is unknown, but it's speculated that she may have fallen asleep while smoking and dropped a cigarette, which started the fire. Once started, she became victim to something known as the wick effect, which is where the victim's melted fat soaks into their clothes and acts like a candle wick. According to Wikipedia, the wick effect theory says a person is kept aflame through their own fats after being ignited. The clothed human body acts like an inside-out candle, with the fuel source, human fat, inside, and the wick, the clothing of the victim, outside. Hence, there is a continuous supply of fuel in the form of melting fat seeping into the victim's clothing. This would explain the lack of other fuel or accelerant. The fire wouldn't need it, as it would just use the fat of your body. It's gruesome, but it's true. The heavy sleeping pills that she took the night beforehand, as well as her bad back, would explain why she didn't immediately wake up when the fire started, and sadly burned to death. She also could have been dead beforehand, and, from either overdose of the pills, heart attack, stroke, or many other things. But due to most of her body being turned to ash, there was no way to tell. The investigators weren't even able to establish a time of death. It's my theory that this isn't spontaneous human combustion. Not at all. But just a rather unfortunate event. We know that she took sleeping pills. We took two, the two again, and was going to take, 2 more? So either 4 or 6 in total, depending on how much she actually took. We also know that she was a smoker and was wearing an acetate gown. It's a pretty good chance she just dropped a cigarette either on the chair or herself. The gown caught fire, and she was dead before she even knew it. She was already in a deep sleep. If it started on the chair first, there's a good chance the smoke, added to that fact. Most people in fires die from smoke inhalation. The carbon monoxide kills you before the fire ever gets to you, and then the fire does the rest. Fires also consume oxygen, so if they take all the oxygen in the area, you can't breathe. The only thing you can breathe is the toxic gas that it puts out, or nothing at all. If she did manage to wake up at all, she was groggy, couldn't move due to the pills and to her back. Hopefully, never woke up. Hopefully, never felt it. The fire got out of hand and burned her before she knew what was going on, and peacefully passed away. As there was really no signs of struggle, that's kind of the best case scenario here. But nothing supernatural. At least, not yet. But I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't just do something like this with this whole episode if there wasn't something weird here. There's got to be more. Well, you'd be right. Though the FBI file doesn't have a whole lot. There is something, but not much. Most of it's filled with those requests from other people talking about specifically the Cinder Lady case, but there's one thing that pops up, one singular mention of another case a few years later in Pennsylvania. On May 18th, 1957, the burned remains of Anna Martin were found in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The following is a letter from an unnamed police captain requesting information on the Reeser case in order to help them solve the Anna Martin case. Captain Redacted, Commanding Officer, Homicide Squad, Philadelphia PD, advises victim found burned to death on May 18, 1957, under mysterious circumstances. Before death, victim weighed approximately 130 pounds. However, remains after death weighed slightly over 50 pounds. The remainder being consumed to ashes. Combustible materials near remains were not scorched, although incineration apparently took place at spot where remains were found. And that's pretty much it. The rest goes on, just requesting more information and then relating it back to the Reeser case, and then talking about the crime laboratory, but nothing else about this poor woman who seemed to suffer a similar fate. And what's strange about that is, well, I tried to look it up, but I couldn't really find anything about it. That was back in 1957, so it was a while ago, but I wasn't able to find a newspaper story, a police file, nothing. The only things I were able to find, though there are a few mentioned, are from some sites, but they don't list their sources. So I don't know if what they're stating is factual. I don't know what they're referencing. All I know is some of these sources, or some of these sites rather, say similar things about the crime scene, but I don't know where they're actually getting that data from. The only official thing I could find and read to you was what I just read, that part of that letter that was in the FBI files, and that is the only thing in those FBI files. They don't have anything else for Anna Martin, nothing else for spontaneous human combustion, nothing. Now, as for unofficial reports with unknown sources, I was able to find some, particularly this one from a place called tokenrock.com. It says on May 18, 1957, Anna Martin, 68, of West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was found incinerated, leaving only her shoes and a portion of her torso. The medical examiner estimated that temperatures must have reached between 1,700 and 2,000 degrees, yet newspapers 2 feet away were found intact. Now, as to where they got that information, I have no idea. I wasn't able to find anything on it. Regardless, if accurate, this seems like another probable case of SHC, or someone tragically succumbing to the wick effect. The site, as well as Wikipedia, also lists several other unfortunate souls. On December 5th, 1966, Dr. J. Irving Bentley's remains were found by a meter reader in the bathroom. All that was left were ashes and the left leg and foot. A hole in the floor was the fire's only evidence. The remainder of the house was intact. Now, if you go look this up, and it's on Wikipedia, and even on Wikipedia you need to be careful. If you don't want to see dead bodies or remains, don't look up this article on spontaneous human combustion, because it shows some of the pictures from the Reeser case, the pictures of the Bentley case, which I'm about to read to you now. But just fair warning, if you're interested, like, I wonder what's going on with this weird stuff, you will see things that you don't want to see, even though it's Wikipedia. Oddly enough, the CIA and FBI files, that doesn't pop up that often. But on Wikipedia, they just want to show you dead bodies. Just figured I'd put that warning out there for you. So I don't have anything else on Anna Martin, but I do have Dr. Bentley's. Dr. Bentley's demise is another one that seemed to be a little bit publicized, as you got those pictures on Wikipedia and other news articles. It's believed that Bentley set himself on fire by accident, though. Tried to put himself out in the bathroom as there were broken remains of a water pitcher in the toilet. It's likely that he passed out before he was able to put out the fire with the water and then was consumed by the flames. Though, even still, the fire stayed in one spot, didn't go up throughout the house. Or didn't go throughout the house, which is strange. And that's probably the strangest thing about all these cases. Supernatural or not, these fires are localized. They stay in one place. Even with the wick effect, you're giving that fire a source. You're giving it something that burns, and burns hot and burns for a long while. But for whatever reason, it doesn't spread. In the Mrs. Reeser case, I believe it said her floor was concrete, so that made some sense. Other things burned, but didn't want to spread out. But in this one, I've looked at the pictures. It was a wood floor, and it burned a hole through it. But it didn't spread beyond that. It just burned where he was. From what I was able to find, this is because of airflow. In this case and other cases, fires depend on airflow, and certain flows will keep them in one spot. Certain flows will also keep them from spreading or make them spread more, or keep them from starting entirely. There's also a phenomenon called a backdraft, which is where a fire that's consumed all available oxygen suddenly explodes when more oxygen is made available, typically when a door or window has been opened. So in these instances, if it was a closed system, then the fire burned in one place and burned out all its available oxygen, wasn't able to spread, and died out before any more oxygen or any rapid flow of oxygen was added. Though in the Bentley case, it burned a hole and such that it burned down and people were actually able to look up and see. So it should have had plenty of air. But not sure why it didn't spread. But even then, not supernatural. Strange, but not supernatural. And in that particular one, he did have a pipe, though it was over on his bed, but they think that he spilled it on his coat. His coat caught fire suddenly because he was wearing a robe. It took him over. He tried to put it out, but then passed out. And then the fire took him. But even then, burning a human body to ash is not particularly easy. It takes a long time. Depending on size and weight, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours at 1400 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a very hot fire. It would be noticeable. So the fact that most of these happened and the person was completely burned to ash before anybody noticed is strange in of itself. But even after that, when people do cremations, that's not how that's said at all. People do cremations at a crematorium in a closed, controlled system. Burning people is difficult, especially with bones. They're notoriously fickle. Everybody imagines someone gets cremated and they come out and they're all one big pile of ash, but that's not how it works. They usually have to grind people down after, because most of the bones, or a good chunk of them, are left intact. In these instances, some of the bones are left intact, some teeth, but where the fire was its hottest, where it was controlled, or at least just where it stayed, there was nothing, not much at all. So that fire got hotter, burned brighter than it does in a controlled environment. You would think your best bet would be a crematorium, but apparently this fire was able to burn a lot hotter and cause a lot more localized damage than ones even in a controlled crematorium. But still, not supernatural, strange, unusual in the fact that it doesn't happen all the time, thank God, but nothing completely out of the ordinary. Once you start figuring certain things in, it doesn't seem that odd. Just unfortunate and sad. Most of these incidents can be chalked up to accidental fires, usually from smoking. The last couple that I read were from the 50s and 60s, so smoking was definitely a bigger thing than it is. There's also theories about lightning strikes or ball lightning, static discharge, and so on causing fires. But still, people are skeptical. And for what it's worth, to mention that SHC isn't just someone catching on fire randomly. The belief is that the fire starts from within the body. Usually you burn inside out. And, well, when the fire is over, it's kind of hard to tell otherwise, because there's not much left behind when it's just ashes. But the things that are left behind are what didn't burn. Now you're probably saying, well, of course, that's common sense. But what I mean by that is we have several of these stories with body parts being left behind, seemingly like the fire started in the middle. In the case of that woman, if it started in the chair or started below, you think it would have got her legs or shoes, but it didn't. It burned in the middle out. Even in Bentley's case, there's a picture of his walker being basically untouched, even though it's sitting in the hole where the fire is. And his legs, or part of his foot and shoe, was left behind as well. So people think, oh, it starts in the middle within, or they're being smited by God or something. Well, there's some explanation for why that could happen as well. So besides smoking and falling on fabric, gotta remember the type of fabrics. You also gotta remember the time in which this was. These stories being from early 50s and 60s, there were lots of incredible fabrics, much more than there are today, and also chemicals that they used to treat clothes or just put on themselves without really even thinking. Even today, dry cleaning involves lots of dangerous volatile chemicals, though it won't affect your clothes once you get them back. It's just, you don't want to light a dry cleaner on fire. Bad stuff. But back in the day, especially, there was stuff that people just had on. People were, oh, I got a new fabric, or they fitted this, or it's new type of plastic, not realizing that it was toxic just to wear, let alone you put a flame on it and boom. I mean, you ever seen what happens when polyester catches fire? I mean, they could have been any of these people. We know one was wearing that acetate gown, but they could have been wearing something incredibly flammable, or even a new type of cologne or aftershave they got a lot more than they bargained for. I mean, we know that this was a possibility. There's also theories that a person's body could be producing or had a buildup of flammable chemicals. Biologist Brian J. Ford has suggested that ketosis, or extreme ketosis, probably caused by alcoholism or just low-carb dieting, can produce acetone within the body, can cause you to excrete it, and acetone is highly flammable, therefore could lead to apparently spontaneous combustion. So if there was a spark and you put on acetone that's on your body, that's going to be bad, or acetone that is leached into your clothes. There's also another theory that inhaling or digesting phosphorus in different forms may lead to the formation of phosphine, which can auto-ignite. And that may come up later. But again, most of these seem to have some sort of simple explanation. But if that was the case for everything, we probably wouldn't be doing this episode, and this legend wouldn't have lived on for as long as it has. Not every case is cut and dry. Not every case is simple. In some cases, the victim lived. On October 9th, 1980, a woman named Jana Winchester was driving in Jacksonville, Florida, when she suddenly burst into flames. This time, the victim wasn't reduced to a pile of ashes. She was lucky enough to be able to get out of the car and have the flames beaten away. And she survived, though she suffered some horrible burns to most of her body. Though it's fine now. They got it out fast enough. From everything I was able to find, it didn't completely disable her. Just gave her some real bad, I believe it's second-degree burns at worst. The true best-case scenario in something like this. A quote that I was able to find is: a subsequent examination of the car revealed virtually no damage, no apparent cause. There was no gas leak. Jana wasn't smoking. The windows were also rolled up, so nobody could have thrown anything into the car. Firemen said they've seen nothing like it. These quotes that I've read are from the floridazone.blogspot.com. I know it doesn't sound very reputable, but the site has clippings from a local newspaper in Jacksonville. There's also other mentions in a newspaper in San Antonio for some reason. And these are kind of the only sources I was able to find about this case. Unlike many of the other cases, Jana wasn't a smoker, which seemed to be kind of the key in a lot of these. Smokers, cigarettes, cigars, pipes, ash, dropping ash on themselves, falling asleep, anything to make a spark. But not here. There were no lighters or any other source. No gas, no alcohol, no acetone, nothing. It was all localized to her clothes, and just suddenly seemed to go up in flames. But she fortunately did survive. Stranger still, as I read through the rest of this site, it seems that Florida is a hotspot for alleged SHC activity. I mean, there's story after story of someone mysteriously catching fire, including another one of a poor old woman back in St. Petersburg 18 years after Miss Reeser. And a lot of these stories are kind of hard to find because they only make it to the local paper. There's not a lot of police reports, not a lot of sheriff's reports, nothing ever makes it big. But when you start to dig, you start to find mentions here and there just in local papers. And unless you know which local paper to look for, it's kind of hard to get exact sources. But once you find them, it's weird that this, at least at one point in time, happened fairly regularly. People burning themselves up. And it makes you understand why people thought this was some supernatural, maybe even demonic phenomenon People were just catching on fire randomly, bursting into flames, exploding. Just poor random people. People that usually lived alone. But again, even in this case, this poor young woman, it can be explained away. I mentioned earlier static electricity. If you build up enough static charge, you can make a spark. And we don't know for sure what caused this particular fire, but if I had to guess, since there was no other source of ignition, no smoking, no lighters, probably had to do with static electricity. You can build up a spark with static electricity. In fact, if you wear certain types of clothes, I don't know what she was wearing, it's really easy to build up that type of static electricity. Even to this day, that's still dangerous at gas pumps. You can build up enough static electricity that it can set off the fumes of the gasoline and cause an explosion. It's not great. There's also, possibly, since the window was rolled up, it's very possible, or not very possible, it's possible the sun's reflection got focused enough that it caused a burn. Unlikely, but possible. A lot more possible than someone just blowing up from the inside. We all know you can burn ants with a magnifying glass. Well, it's the same day. I know it was October, but I also know it's in Florida, but I don't know how hot it was that day or any other factors. I do know it was 1980. May have been a lot of hairspray. Just saying, though it doesn't say anything about her hair. I mean, sometimes people are just really unlucky. Though in her case, she was both unlucky and lucky. Because most people you hear about with this type of story become ash. But fortunately, she survived. Another thing I would like to point out is people usually believe that this starts from the inside and the fire started by the person. But reading the story, she talks about her clothes catching on fire, specifically her clothes. Doesn't know how or where, but it started on her clothes. They had to get the clothes off. The fire wasn't burning from within her skin. It was her clothes. Once they got the clothes batted down, she was good. And you would think that'd be the end of the story, right? Just a bunch of random unfortunate events, but with normal, not easily identifiable causes. Well, not so fast. As it turns out, there'd be a little quirk in this. Because there's been an official case of spontaneous human combustion. And it happened just 15 years ago. On December 22nd, 2010, a man by the name of Michael Faharty, age 76, was found burned to death in his home in Galway, Ireland. The scene looked much like the ones described before. It seems the same as all the other stories, but what makes this one stand out is the coroner's verdict on the death. In the other cases, the cause of the fire would simply be listed as unknown, the source of ignition assumedly destroyed by the resulting fire. But not here. Dr. Ciaran McLoughlin, the coroner of West Galway, ruled that the death of Michael Faharty was due to spontaneous human combustion, the first such case in Irish history, and at least from what I could find, the first official case in world history. The following is a direct quote from the BBC article published on September 23, 2011. Dr. McLoughlin said that he consulted medical textbooks and carried out research in an attempt to find an explanation. He said Professor Bernard Knight, in his book on forensic pathology, had written about spontaneous combustion and noted that such reported cases were almost always near an open fireplace or chimney. This fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. Of course, this is just one coroner, who could have gotten it wrong, as many have over time. But even still, this is an official case. A coroner ruled it as SHC in modern times. Though it should be noted that the coroner in question has had a lot of critics, especially about this particular case, with people saying that you can't say that. There's no reason to believe that in spontaneous human combustion as it's an inherently supernatural belief. It's the belief that it's random and comes from within a person, usually. And there's no evidence for that. It should be noted that spontaneous human combustion and spontaneous combustion are two different things. So spontaneous human combustion is a supernatural thing. As I said, people believing that it starts from the human body. But spontaneous combustion is different. And a lot of times they get kind of put together. Spontaneous combustion is there are some substances that auto-ignite. We talked about one with that phosphine. There are some things when left out in the sun, it gets to the right temperature and boom, they go off. That's different than spontaneous human combustion. Now, you could have something where a human spontaneously combusts due to a chemical or other factors, but that's not technically spontaneous human combustion, as one has a supernatural, paranormal element. Though, you wouldn't really notice it looking at it. You would just see someone burst into flames. But if they had, I don't know, covered in gasoline and there was a spark, that's what it would look like. But you wouldn't know that just by looking at them. You would know if they had the gasoline or caused their own spark or kicked a rock or whatever. You just saw a person walking by and then suddenly they were on fire. Now, do I believe that any of these cases, including this one, were SHC? Did any of these people just randomly burst into flames that their own body made or from some other supernatural means? No, I don't believe that. I don't believe in most of these cases that the explanation is spontaneous human combustion. I believe in most cases it's simple, just not readily identifiable at the time. Usually because the ignition source was burnt up. That's how fires work. Most supernatural deaths like this, and other things in folklore, are just that. Incredibly unfortunate and tragic events, but simple. They're just not readily identifiable at the time, or understood. But they're not beyond natural law and order. Just because we don't understand something at the time doesn't make it magic. It just means we don't understand it yet, or that there's missing information. And that's usually where I would leave this. I'd love to wrap it all up here. A nice fun dive into mysterious cases, but, leaving off with a more or less solid conclusion. Unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen. Fortunately, there's more to the story. Before I go on, I want to mention that I'm not trying to support or strengthen conspiracy theories of any kind. I'm also not trying to trample on anyone's spiritual beliefs. These are two different things. I'm simply relaying information. I'm a spiritual person myself, but in these cases of alleged SHC, it seems that a fire started and the ignition source burned up with it. The only one outside of that particular circumstance was Gianna Winchester. But even then, there are explanations for what happened to her. Logical ones, reasonable ones. The fire didn't start within her. It was her clothes that caught fire first and then burned her. If it was SHC, or like it's believed to happen, usually the fire starts within the body, some other mysterious means. But the body is usually the source of the fire. Or at least in most views. But it isn't the only view or belief of SHC. And to note again, these people, all of these cases, could have been coated in something that was flammable or volatile, especially the ones in the 50s and 60s, back in the days when the world used all kinds of chemicals without testing them. Remember, Coca-Cola used to have actual cocaine in it. 7-Up had lithium. We used to insulate houses with asbestos, and we used to paint things with radioactive radium paint. But that's a horror story for another time. I could list for hours and hours the many different things we used to use commonly that eventually we found out were killing us. Smoking used to be seen as healthy. Even today, there are still things that we use that we know are highly volatile, but we tell people that. Things like fertilizers, like ammonium nitrate, those are still used today. And we all know they can be easily turned into bombs, like with the OKC bombing in '95, or cause massive explosions on their own, like in Texas City in '47 and Beirut in 2020. But unknown is that the chemical can build up over time in someone's work clothes, making themselves incredibly flammable, or even explosive. There's even a Mythbusters episode about this. All that's to say is spontaneous combustion of someone's clothes or immediate surroundings is more likely to happen than spontaneous human combustion, at least in the belief where the fire or ignition source comes from within one's own body. However, like I said before, that's not the only theory of how SHC works. Like I said earlier, I thought I was done with this story. I thought I had all I needed, but then I realized something. I'd looked at FBI files, news stories, and other sites, but I hadn't looked at the CIA files yet. I mean, there was this massive database that I hadn't consulted. Nothing came up listing the CIA in my surface searches through Google, so I didn't think about it until later. So I went to their website, went to the electronic reading room, which I'll use as shorthand for the Freedom of Information Act electronic reading room, and then used their search tool, CREST. I typed in spontaneous human combustion and got 462 results. This piqued my interest, but it didn't mean much at first. CREST is a wonderful search tool, and the reading room is a great treasure trove of information. But just because something pulls up a bunch of results doesn't mean you're going to find what you're looking for. Not every file is a case file or a report. Many are just information files where the CIA gathered information on various subjects. I mean, you'll find articles, sometimes full newspapers, magazines, comics, books, etc. All different things that they've collected. In short, they do this to get a read on current events and cultures of a certain time and place. This helps them when they eventually do have to plan something in a certain region. You know, they can't treat every place the same or like America. Every place is different, and if you're doing some spy stuff, you kind of want to blend in. Because of this, much of what you find is presented plainly and without context. Like I said, there's comic books, random jokes, plays, excerpts from all kinds of different works of fiction, and other things. For example, if you search Dracula, you'll get 18 results, one of which is a costume list for a Halloween party. So if there's anything to SHC in these files, I was going to have to dig through them to find it. Surprisingly, I didn't have to dig very far. I found some results listing excerpts from something called the Chinese Journal of Somatic Sciences, Volume 1, Number 5, released back in November of 1991. Now, I've tried looking up this particular journal, but it either doesn't exist anymore, or it's something only available in China. Deep within this volume, though, I found two articles that caught my eye. The study of phenomena of energy collection by the human body, and a series of investigations of localized spontaneous combustion on the human body. First, let's start with a series of investigations of localized spontaneous combustion on the human body from the Hunan Medical University. First thing I did was to see if this university was real, and it is, or at least was. It's currently known as the Central South University after they merged with several others back in 2000 and then changed their name. The report itself details an investigation of a spontaneous human combustion, specifically a case involving a 4-year-old boy in the Hubei province in April of 1990. Now forgive me, I'm probably going to mispronounce a bunch of stuff, of anything that pops out that's not easily translated into English. Another thing that should be noted is these documents came from an originally Chinese source and then were translated by an agent. So some of the things I've read might be off, but I tried to get it all down as best I could. But this case here was made even more interesting because it wasn't just one event. The boy caught fire 4 times in 4 different places on his body over the course of 2 hours, with the last being the worst. He was surrounded by family and multiple witnesses every time this happened, and the last time he was lying naked on his bed being treated for burns by his family when, according to a witness, a blue fireball fell from one of his legs and landed on the mattress, causing it to catch fire. This happened after the child had already come home from the hospital once that day from the 3 other burns. But luckily, none of the burns were life-threatening, and the child was able to recover. It should be noted that the fireball, at least according to that one witness, came from the child's leg. Now, earlier I was talking about the belief that the fire comes from within the body or out of the body. Well, here we have a witness saying just that. But after an extensive investigation, the team found some interesting results. Interesting in part because I think the terms SHC and spontaneous combustion are being confused. But what the team found was there was an abnormal build of static electricity in the home, as well as in the area, and an unusual buildup of yellow phosphorus. The phosphorus had come from the well water, which the family was using for everything, including cleaning the floor, and they noticed that the water had dried up and had left behind phosphorus residue all over the home. Phosphorus, which when ignited with a strong enough static charge, will cause a fire, or a fireball. The combustion was spontaneous, but it wasn't strictly spontaneous human combustion. It didn't come from his body, but it was on his body. The boy's home, as well as his skin and clothes, were covered in phosphorus. So, you got that static charge, builds up, causes a spark, and ignites the phosphorus that was unknowingly all over him, and unfortunately burned him. Though I will state again, though he was burned, he did survive, and he is fine. But this seems to line up with the theories that I've already suggested. Just simple explanations for very strange events, but nothing unnatural. Nothing supernatural. Just unfortunate. The next report, or study, however, is not like that. The study of the phenomena of energy collection by the human body from the Beijing Science and Engineering College really goes off the deep end. Whereas with spontaneous human combustion, you can kind of sit back and go, well, maybe something happened. And if you're not considering that the fire came within the body, you can think, well, it can be a bunch of different random things. A spark here, there, something random. Well, even smited by God, whatever. But it doesn't have to be strictly supernatural. There's a distance to it. You can study it without being fully immersed in quote-unquote crazy. This isn't that. This particular study is a study regarding the use of ESP to generate heat and or cause fires. It's a study where people use their psychic powers to start fires. Off to a good start. Like before, I tried looking up the college, but I couldn't find it. A lot of similarly named ones, but nothing that matches. However, it doesn't mean that this isn't real, or at the very least the college isn't real. This could be due to various translation issues. Maybe they got the college or the arrangement of what it is wrong. Maybe the college did change its name, but something different. Maybe it's something to do with just the information we have from China. China plays things very close to the chest when it comes to releasing any information regarding their country. I would imagine the same thing would be there when it came to their universities and colleges. So just because I couldn't find it doesn't mean that the college doesn't exist. The other college existed, and some of the other information did. So it could just be a weird little wrinkle in this story. So, backing up again, I stated before that the belief of SHC is usually that it comes from within the body. The fire starts there, just randomly for some reason. Either, chemicals or divinity, maybe God or some other divine or even demonic force didn't like you and smited you. Maybe you're just a bad person and you caught fire, who knows? But it's something that usually comes from within the body. Beyond that, there's also the idea that it could be caused by someone using ESP. Specifically something called pyrokinesis, otherwise known as setting things on fire with your mind. It's somehow crazier than the belief that sometimes human bodies just catch on fire for no reason, but it goes in a few different directions. And one is you have this ability, or someone has the ability, and it's an assassin or a murderer or even someone doing it by accident, like the movie or book Firestarter, and just accidentally catching someone on fire. So all these innocent people that caught on fire, it could be someone else doing it to them, but either purposefully or by accident. The other is the person who got caught up in the fire had this ability unknowingly and either lit themselves on fire by accident by activating it, or the energy built up so much over time it just released by itself and killed the person. I mean, this is crazy, right? It's obviously not real. I mean, someone can't light fires with their mind. They can't do anything with their mind like that. That would easily be testable and provably false, right? Well, that's exactly what they tried to do in this study. They tried to test it. The following is read directly from the study of the phenomena of energy collection by the human body. The translation may be a little poor. That ESP can generate a phenomena of heat has drawn the attention of people in the science fields in China for some time. Psychic Shang XX has on a number of occasions in public used his hand to burn clothes and hats. Other people with ESP abilities have also done a number of experiments where they've generated paranormal heat energy. Actually, this generation of paranormal heat energy by the human body has unconsciously occurred for several individuals. The phenomenon of spontaneous combustion of the human body belongs in this category. Recently, there have also been frequent stories concerning this, such as the newspaper report in 1989 about a pair of sweethearts in a certain country in Europe who were embracing in the square and that caught fire and burned to death. Also in Sea City in the southwest, there is a female student, 20 years old, who caught fire on 2 different occasions. Because it was discovered in time, she did not suffer any harm. This illustrates that the paranormal heat generation by the human body is a paranormal biological phenomenon in which objectively it exists. The differences between the 2 different types of situation described above is that the former is achieved by conscious thought and the latter occurs unconsciously. Even though a number of people have seen this with their own eyes, and of the present time, it can still not be proven scientifically, and no quantitative scientific records have been obtained. In order to further explore this biological phenomenon, we've used methods of modern physics to conduct a number of experiments and obtain some preliminary results. Experimental programs. Number 1. We invited 2 psychics who shall remain unnamed to consciously cause a rise in temperature of cold water in a test tube. Then we measured the temperatures and calculated the heat as a scientific analysis of the heat-focusing effect of the human body in a state of ESP. In order to avoid phenomena caused by the effect of ESP on a certain individual sensor, we used a number of different sensors to directly observe the water temperature and its changes to obtain relatively accurate scientific evidence on the rise in temperature. Temperatures greater than 40 times C were to be achieved with 2 types of probes and 3 reading methods given consistent results. This was done for effective accuracy in the experiment to improve the degree by which the recordings could be believed. 4. We used a millimeter with radiometer for synchronous observation of changes in electromagnetic radiation during the rise in temperature in order to explore the changes and related properties in the human body during the process of energy focusing and to search for possible inherent relationships. 5. We observed the phenomenon of rising temperature and other ESP ability experiments. Section 2. Testing methods. Number 1. We used a glass test tube 15 to 20 millimeters in diameter and 15 millimeters long. We put 4 to 5 millimeters of cold water into this test tube and placed a glass alcohol thermometer and transistor thermometer probe into the water. We then had the psychic hold the test tube in his hand and tried to heat it. We recorded the experiment using the thermometer, the probe, and an XY recorder, recording the process and the results of any rise in temperature. During this time, we used millimeter wave radio thermometer to monitor the microwave radiation from the body of the psychic during the rise in temperature. We placed a transistor thermometer probe in the medicine bottle used in the experiment and sealed it with a 2-layer lid. We then tested the changes in temperature during an experiment of shaking out the medicine using ESP. I don't know what that means, by the way. They don't really explain it. We also used a millimeter wave radiometer for synchronous monitoring. We used physical rises in temperature, such as using a match or a lighter to raise temperature and a normal person causing a rise in temperature as controls to analyze the rise in temperature characteristics of ESP energy focus. Results of the experiment. Between the 2 psychics, there were 7 successful experiments following the standards of the experiment design. The temperatures they achieved were 72.5 Celsius, 61.5 Celsius, 60 Celsius, 52.5 Celsius, 52 Celsius, 51 Celsius, and 43.5 Celsius. The highest temperature attained was 72.5 Celsius. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't expecting that at all. The report goes on to have an analysis of the results, and things get even stranger. First of all, look at those temperatures. Those couldn't be achieved by just warming it with your hand. I mean, the highest that I would think you could get would maybe be, I don't know, just above your body temperature. But the lowest temp there was 110.3 degrees Fahrenheit, with the highest being over 162 degrees Fahrenheit. In the analysis report, they talk about how they made sure no one had anything in their hand or sleeves that could warm up the water. And one of the psychics even asked for a towel to be wrapped around the vial so they wouldn't burn their hand. So nothing they could have had was touching the glass. They also had regular people try to heat the vial using their body heat, and they could only get it to about 36 Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is much lower than I expected they would. They also only gave him about 10 seconds to do this. Stranger still, after they reached the temperature of 72.5 degrees Celsius, they took a reading of the psychic's hands, and the surface temperature was between 30 and 37 degrees Celsius, which is around normal body temperature. This led them to believe that the rise in temperature didn't come from physical touch, but rather paranormal energy-focused radiation. So, what does this mean? Well, I'm not particularly sure. If this isn't some weird trick or Chinese propaganda, I'm not entirely sure what happened here. I mean, even if it is a trick or something like that, why? What would China, especially in the 90s, hope to have accomplished with a story like this? Just to make us look like fools? Then again, it wasn't exactly published widely until the documents got released later. That they were just trying to make the CIA believe they had magic powers. Then again, it was published in a journal that was assumingly available to everyone in China. But what if it's a trick of the psychics? What could they have done? What could they have done that wouldn't have been noticed? Heat's fairly noticeable, and a flame or a hot plate or even a wire would have been noticed, and they used several different measurement methods to measure the temperature. So if they just were doing something that, let's say, just went straight to one thermometer, they would have noticed it because the other thermometer wouldn't have gone off. And you don't have to heat up the water, you just have to heat up the sensor, but there's more than one sensor. They used more than one measuring tool. They all got consistent readings. So what they've used, what could they have done to trick the scientist? It's also said in the report that the water and tube felt warm to the scientist after they had the psychics warm it up. So it wasn't just them, even somehow they were able to trick all the sensors. It passed the hand touch. At the hand test, they actually warmed up physically the water, the objects. It's possible, or is it possible, that these may have been real psychics? That they somehow have some sort of heat or radiation powers that they can activate with their mind? Is this something that all people can do? Or is it just the Chinese screwing with us? But even then, they wouldn't be screwing with us, they'd be screwing with their own people. I don't know. What I find incredible is that this report, or in both these reports, it addresses spontaneous human combustion and basically concludes that in most cases, spontaneous human combustion is caused by an unknown natural ignition source and accelerant. Or like with what happened with that boy. Because in that report, though I didn't read it, it was very, very long, I just gave you the snapshots of that first one. They did talk about cases of spontaneous human combustions and thoughts of possible supernatural causes and so on and so forth. But I thought it was more interesting to just read what they found out about the boy, because they went through a lot of different testing, and then someone found out, oh, his house is covered in phosphorus, that'll do it, and came to the conclusion that in that case, in most cases, probably unknown accelerant, unknown ignition source, probably static, plus whatever they were covered in, causing these things to happen. And even in the psychic report, they said, probably, but that sometimes it can be this other one. Sometimes it can be psychic powers. And in that same report saying, hey, we tested psychic powers and they're real, but spontaneous human combustion most likely isn't. At least for the most part. That's kind of crazy. Because I go further saying that it can happen, but usually it's not someone exploding for no reason. Even in the psychic powers, it could be them doing it to themselves, maybe by accident, or someone else doing it to them. That's a little strange. That even in this one, they're still kind of apprehensive of it being just this weird phenomenon that just happens, but it's like, oh no, but the psychic powers, that's totally real. So we believe in that. They say that no one's tested it, so they went to actually test it and got people to raise the water temperature to over 160 degrees Fahrenheit. That's insane. They both believe that SHC isn't real, or at least not as it's commonly believed to be, but pyrokinesis might be. that wasn't exactly the turn that I think you, I, nor anyone else was expecting the story to take. But that's where we got. I'm sure to do more episodes on this particular thing, on pyrokinesis, as there's a lot more. There's those 462 files the CIA have. And maybe I'll find some more interesting things. Maybe I'll find that it was all a joke. Maybe I'll find that it's some big lie or propaganda thing. Or maybe I'll find more that says, oh no, it's real. Maybe the CIA even knows about it. And they're like, oh yeah, we use it, but it's just not cost effective. It's just easier to use a gun. As that's something we'll get into later, some of these things, where they just don't pursue certain things. Not because they don't think they're real or that there's no evidence for them, but because it's just easier to shoot someone. Which is sad. Other than that, that's all I have for this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's the first episode. It's a little rocky. We're still trying to figure out the format of everything. But I thank y'all for lending your ear and spending this time with me. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you back here on Reel to Reel.